Welcome to today's presentation on the history of the Chadwick Flyer. This is the Frisco's more famous branch line that ran from Springfield via Ozark down to Chadwick. It has been in the news as of late as there are plans by the Greenway folks to make it into a bike trail, specifically a section from Springfield to Ozark, which I'll be touching upon that later in the presentation. Today's presentation is brought to you by yours truly, Richard Crabtree. I'm a realtor with Murney Associates. I love selling older historic homes. I sell everything, but I do love specializing in older homes and, of course, helping people buy them, restore them. And the one thing I really enjoy is finding the home's history, because every home has a history and a story, and I like to share that with folks. If I can help you out in any way in that capacity, please give me a call. So the Springfield and Southern Railroad was put together by a group of investors in 1882. They decided they were going to build a line from Springfield to Chadwick. They originally envisioned saving money to build it as a narrow gauge line, like the Durango-Silverton line that still runs today in Colorado. However, when they looked at converting everything as far as transferring boxcars and goods from one to the other because of the different gauges, it didn't make a lot of sense, and so they just opted to stay with standard gauge. So the original design was to reach all the way to Harrison, and then if that worked out, they would make it all the way to Arkansas, to Little Rock. However, they had to get to Chadwick first. So to save the money that they couldn't do on narrow gauge, on the standard gauge line, they opted to follow the contours of the land. So they used as much flat land as they possibly could without building tunnels and bridges and so forth. So they also used a lighter pound rail, under 50 pounds, so that restricted the weight and length of some of the locomotives. The length of the train was really restricted due to the fact of the grade. So they had to follow a 2 to 2.5% grade. So sometimes going down or coming back, they could run a longer train just depending on how heavy it was. In 1882, they had built a good chunk of the line from Springfield to Ozark. They finished it up in 83 when they finally hit Oldfield and Chadwick. They ended up using the Frisco's main depot on Commercial Street, and then they also connected with a secondary depot that was down at Phelps and Jefferson. At this time, the train station at Mill and Main was used by their competitor, the Kansas City, Fort Scott, and Gulf/Memphis Railroad, so they wanted to get as close as they could without actually using that depot. So then the next stops, once you left Springfield, would be Langston, Galloway, Gates, which would later be called Kissick, Cassidy, Ozark, Sparta, and Chadwick. The depots that were on the line were Springfield, Galloway, Ozark, Sparta, and Chadwick. All the others were what they call a blind station. That more or less meant that they had a signpost with the name for the train to stop, and that was it. In 1887, the Frisco decided to acquire the line. They needed more railroad ties and other goods to grow their railroad, so they ended up acquiring it to bring those goods to market from that area. And they also had this dream of finally making it possibly to Harrison or Little Rock. Now, because of the poundage of the rails, the size of the engine, the grade, and so forth, it wasn't a speedy line. It wasn't called the Chadwick Rocket. They could do about 10 miles an hour. Now, that doesn't sound very fast, but take in consideration that back in this time frame, it could take you 5 to 7 days by horseback just to make it down the Hollister, because you had to traverse through all the canyons and valleys and so forth, and you had to stop and feed and water and rest your horses, and so it took a while. So this was actually kind of speedy, and so they ended up getting quite a bit of traffic for the area anyway. So the first stop on this would be the main depot for the Frisco on Commercial Street, and this was right off of Benton. And none of this exists today, but this is where the train would originate. This is a better view of that depot and then the Frisco Hotel right behind it. All of this is gone. You actually also see the Frisco Roundhouse and, of course, some of the trains traversing. But this is where the train would start, and then it would head to the second depot. So the second depot was down at Phelps Street, and of course none of this exists anymore either. I've never seen a picture of this. This is a Sanborn map that we have from the era, and it does show it, but I've yet to ever come across a picture. So we're assuming this was built, we're assuming it went there, it was listed, so that's all we can do. In this picture, one of the more famous engineers of the Chadwick Flyer was Owen Biggie Morton, and his fireman. We don't know the fireman's name, but his daughter decided to come with him one day. You know, you should always bring your kid and put him on a steam engine. Should be a lot of fun. So the other depot that would come into play when the other two were basically wiped out due to the merger of the Frisco and the Kansas City, Fort Scott, and Memphis rail lines, they then moved the passenger operations down to Mill and Main, which is the area that most of us are familiar with. And this was their first depot, and that stood until it was replaced with this one in 1926. This is the one that most of us in the area are familiar with. It was torn down in 1977. So at one time or another, they would either leave from commercial or they would leave from Phelps, and eventually they would leave from Mill and Main. So where is their first stop outside of Springfield? Well, this was kind of a blind spot. This was called Langston and Fisher Cave were your first two stops. Now, Fisher Cave, most of you never heard of it called that because it was later become Sequiota Park. They had no depot there. Like I said, it was a blind station stop. In this picture, you see a happy group of Springfield Acorns that had visited via the Frisco Railroad down there on October 4th of 1906. The Frisco loved going down here. They ended up having many gatherings, and in the newspaper you would see lots of articles of all the parties and reunions and so forth that would happen down there, and they would have special trains that would run by the 1912-13 time frame. To keep their costs down, they acquired what some people call a doodle bug. The Frisco called them bull mooses, and they were basically a motorized rail car. And so they were quite popular, and they would ramble down. They could actually hook on another passenger car to increase their capacity. This is actually a photograph of the Frisco employees having what they called their veterans reunion party that they would have every fall. And this time it was down there at Sequiota Park. Well, this is a very interesting picture because I've been looking for a picture of this depot for quite some time. And I don't know why there's only one, but this is the only one we've ever come across. So this is the, on the Chadwick branch, this is the Galloway depot. And behind the depot, you can actually see that they have a two-story house as a section house. That meant that some of the folks lived there that took care of the line. The section gang that took care of the line, they could live in that house. You'll see another one when we get to Ozark. This is the branch and the depot, so we can see that the station or depot used to be right there on the Brookline Rogersville Road and what was now Commercial Street. And they none of this is there, unfortunately. It's all gone. But the line still is there, and you can see where the depot used to sit. And then they would head off from, now that we've left Langston and Galloway, our next stop is going to be headed towards Gates. And of course, we have to cross over the James River. And it's interesting, I've been told that part of this is going to have to be rebuilt due to some fires and other structural issues. The metal portion will remain, but the wood is going to have to be redone. So it'll look slightly different when we get the opportunity to cross it. So now we are crossing into Christian County, and our first stop will be Gates. The fourth depot that we come across on the Chadwick is the Ozark depot. This is probably one of the most photographed areas or towns on the entire line. Mr. Pullen actually shot quite a bit more in the Christian slash Stone County area. He seemed to be enamored with that area, so we have a lot of photographs from Mr. Pullen. And this is of the depot that also functions as a section house, which we'll cover here in a little bit. You can see here where the depot originated or basically sat. Now today, a lot of people go down to Finley Farms. Johnny Morris has redone the old mill down there, which you can see on this topographical map here showing where the mills was located next to the Finley River. If you come back a little ways, you can actually see where the depot and the water tank was. You can see all this better in this photograph that gives us a very unique view of how all the depot and the water tank in that area was laid out. This is a floor plan that comes from the MSU archives, and it shows both stories. So you can see the waiting room, the ticket office, and the freight and baggage, and upstairs was a living room, kitchen, dining room, and bedroom. And this is the way most of these section houses were laid out. But like I said, this one is also a section house slash ticket office. This actually shows a picture of what a section gang looks like. So their duty was to traverse a section of the line every day and look for loose railroad ties, loose spikes, rails that had popped up, and different things of that nature. And so they were there to ensure that you had a nice, smooth ride. This is probably the more famous picture that most people have seen of the Chadwick Flyer in Ozark, and this comes from Wayne Glenn's collection. So the train needs water, and not all water is good water. As we know, living here in the Ozarks, the water around here can be quite horrible. So if you can get it from a good spring that maybe has a little softer water, that's always the best option. So they would actually pull water for the water tank from the Garrison Spring, which is still there. And it was a popular place to go picnic. Some of the lovely ladies of the day are sitting there getting their photograph taken. And a lot of people look over and go, oh my goodness, this water tank has a horrible problem. It was actually designed to leak, and that was to prevent the water from freezing on the inside. And so there's a gentleman, you can barely see him snuck in there in between all the ice. So now we come to another interesting thing that was very common on the Frisco line, and that was the farmers bringing their goods to market. So while they're at the station near the mill, it was uncommon to load up the train or unload the train there. So this was a scene where a lot of people would get together. It was kind of our Facebook of the day. This is where everybody got together and shared their information and got to see everybody. So it was kind of cool. So once it left the Ozark station, it's now headed on its next run. And so the big obstacle it had was crossing the Finley River. And as we all know around here, the Finley River has a nasty habit of flooding. And this is actually a photograph that was taken during the 1909 flood on the Howe Truss Bridge. Now, this bridge was quite interesting in the way it was structured. It was a very ornate-looking bridge, and it was interesting that, like everybody today that are Instagrammers, there were some early Instagrammers getting their picture taken on the bridge. You're not supposed to do this, folks, because trains could come by and you could get hit. So please don't do that. It makes the railroaders very upset if they hit you. It takes a while to clean you off. So the bridge survives multiple floods. In fact, you'll see coming up in this picture in the bottom corner, there is a wooden covered bridge that used to traverse over the Finley going to the mill. And unfortunately, during the flood of 1909, it got damaged and actually was shoved up against the Frisco Stone Howe Truss Bridge. And so it would have to be replaced. And you see its replacement here, which is still there. And that bridge is very similar to the one that was further upstream that would now be sitting also kind of catty corner from there as part of the Finley Farms compound. Onward to McCracken. So this is one of the few photographs that we have of McCracken, and they actually had a mill there named McCracken. And we see a 10-wheeler zipping by, as remember, the blazing speed of 10 miles an hour, and it was going by the mill. This is a great picture here in McCracken, and this kind of shows you what a blind station stop is. It's just a sign. And if they knew they were supposed to stop, they would. If it was a flag stop or a whistle stop where you could wave at them and stop, they would do that as well, as long as they were doing passenger service. So again, bringing up dairy and grain and wood from this area was very essential, and also bringing goods back to the area. This is another very difficult station to get pictures of. We have no existing pictures that I'm aware of from back in its day. This picture is actually of the depots sitting here in Sparta on private property. It's been moved onto somebody's farm. It used to be in the town, but it's no longer there. But at least it's standing. That is one plus. Onward to Lee's, or Oldfield, because that's what it was called before. Of course, most people know Oldfield today for their little Opry that they have their music at. Also, these was a blind stop. And we are getting very, very close to reaching our final stop, which would be Chadwick. So the Chadwick was the end of the line. So unfortunately, the Frisco never got the money to go any further. And I'll explain that in a minute. You can see that the train literally came right down in the middle of town. Now, that was by accident. When they were laying everything out, they misinterpreted where some of the land was and the government land and so forth, and they ended up building on government land. But they were able to work it out and get the land laid out to be a town. They also put in a turntable, which is kind of cool. We actually have a picture of that. And so the Chadwick depot is built like all the other depots that was on the line. And of course, it was really set up for bringing in a lot of railroad ties. So since it was the end of the line, other areas would chop their wood and bring it in by wagons and stack it here. And then it was to be taken into Springfield and sold and so forth, as well as cotton and other goods and other crops that people would grow. Now, up at the top corner, you'll see a bunch of people in a wagon. That's actually called a hack. And this was the fastest way prior to 1906, 1907 timeframe. This was the fastest way if you wanted to get down to Hollister, Forsyth, Branson, that area. You would take the train all the way to Chadwick, and then you would rent a hack such as this, and they would traverse over horrible roads that took a while, and you could finally make your way into Hollister, Forsyth, or Branson. And it could take you a whole day of journey, maybe even up to 2 days, depending on how bad the roads were, just to make that trip. So here we are at the end of the line, and we are on the turntable. So they're getting ready to spin her up and shoot her right back up to Springfield. And like I said, this is one of the advantages of this line. The engineer and fireman could make it home, as well as the conductor, and have a nice meal and go right to bed and do it again the next day. So what happened to this line? Well, the Depression was obviously very impactful, and so they ended up losing quite a bit of revenue on the line. And in 1933, the Frisco basically opted to end service past Ozark. They asked for an abandonment from the government. The people threw a hissy fit. They didn't want them to do it. They promised that they would improve their revenue and get all sorts of goods, but something happened. So during World War I, we lost people, and then also we had a scenario where they're basically going to have a scenario where they're going to lose people due to the Depression. They just lost industries and business and so forth. And so there wasn't enough there to really support it. So, but it made sense to keep it at least to Ozark, to the mill, and some other stuff along the way. So in 1980, 90s, in that time frame, that's when they finally started discontinuing running all the way down to Ozark. Now, some of this line, some of you folks may traverse on because Tracker Road, which runs by Tracker and 65, that used to be the rail bed, and it went down to an old restaurant called Bumstead's, which is gone, and that's where it crossed over 65. And so now, with the advent of the coal being taken out of the James River Power Plant, there was no need to run a train down there anymore. And a train hasn't ran down there for some time. Really, the biggest things utilizing that particular line would be the craft foods. So basically, what we're looking at is from around the Nature Center, Southern Hills area, traversing down through Galloway, and then eventually picking up the roadbed. And then as far as the way they're going to cross, I had asked the folks, and they said, well, they checked into both doing a tunnel as well as doing a bridge. Now, of course, there's no way you could do the original route where you just drive over the highway. That would be a nightmare. So the option was to go for the bridge. That seemed to be the most affordable route, and also the route that would give people the most safety and security. Plus, they could put a really cool Frisco sign on there, I'm hoping, to advertise people, the wonders of the old Chadwick branch. So unfortunately, this is not going to happen anytime soon. This could take 5 to 10 years. We'll all be a little older and wiser by then, and can cost in the upwards of $20 million. So I wish them luck. I hope it happens. I hope that some of these photographs and images that we have can be put on signs along the way so folks can learn more about the history of this wonderful line. And I'm very glad that I've been able to put together some of this information to share with all of you. Of course, I am on Facebook. I have about 12 different pages. Most people know me from the Springfield, Missouri history, landmarks, and vintage photography. But I also have 4 Frisco pages, as well as other pages for different counties and different railroads. So you're welcome to join that to learn more about the line. I'll be posting more goodies on there as information presents itself. I also will be posting more on YouTube, and you can go to the YouTube and type in my name and find other history talks I've done on Springfield and the general area, as well as the Frisco Railroad, and hope you enjoy those. Well, I thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation, and I hope that you learned something and it was enjoyable, and hopefully you can share it with others and they can enjoy it as well. My wife and I and our little dog Bella, thank you very much for taking the time to spend this few minutes learning about the history of the Chadwick branch of the Frisco Railroad. Good day.